Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, sponsored by Hlth, the world's largest environmental experience, and also sponsored by Natural Awakenings magazine. Live your healthiest life on a healthier planet. Now here's your host, Bernice Butler.
Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today. We are now in our second season and more excited than ever to continue to help you explore and understand the unbreakable relationship between your health and the health of the planet. Here we look at the hottest topics related to our environment and its sustainability and how they affect your health and wellness. Here, issues like climate change, plastic pollution, extreme weather events, and others will meet up with everyday impacts like allergies and asthma, digestive issues, gut health issues, cancers, lung and heart issues, and more. So listen in today as we interview experts for today's show on waste and waste management, toxic chemical waste and e-waste, environmental and health consequences and opportunities of these. Hazardous or toxic waste is the potentially dangerous byproduct of a wide range of activities, including manufacturing, farming, water treatment systems, construction, automotive garages, laboratories, hospitals, and many other industries. The waste may be liquid, it may be solid or sludge, and contain chemicals as well as heavy metals, radiation, pathogens, or other materials. Even households generate hazardous waste, much of that from the many items that we all use all the time, every day. Toxic waste can harm people, it can harm animals and plants, whether it ends up in the ground, in streams, or even in the air. Some toxins, such as mercury and lead, persist in the environment for many, many years, and they accumulate over time. And humans or wildlife often absorb these toxic substances when they eat fish or other prey. So this is a lot because this is all around us. And here today to start us out to understand this more and how it affects our everyday being is Dr. William Suk. He is with the National Institute of Health with their National Institute of Environmental and Health Sciences. And he's going to talk to us a lot from the health and hazardous waste perspective. Dr. Suk is director of both the Center for Risk and Integrated Sciences and the Superfund Research Program, as well as the chief of the Hazardous Substances Research Branch in the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences in their Division of Extramural Research and Training. His affiliation with a number of organizations and committees include the Roundtable on Environmental Health Sciences, Research and Medicine, the Institute of Medicine, and the National Academy of Sciences, among many, many, many others. He also sits on the editorial boards of a number of international journals, including Environmental Health, Toxicology and Environmental Chemistry, the International Journal of Occupational Medicine and Environmental Health, and he has been a National Science Foundation Fellow. Welcome back, Dr. Suk. We're very glad to have you. He was among our guests early on in our very first season, so we're excited that you could join us again. Thank you for being with us today.
Well, thank you, Bernice. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Indeed. Bill, start us out by talking to us and telling our listeners about the four types of hazardous waste and what is the most dangerous waste that we come in contact with.
Okay. Let's keep things in some perspective, okay? For the most part, we are not usually exposed to, except in an occupational setting, individual chemicals at high levels, okay? We are usually exposed to a variety of chemicals, a mixture, I like to say a more of a combined exposure of chemicals. And this presents both an opportunity and a concern. The concern is that we, for the most part, meaning the government, as well as private industry, have a tendency to focus in on a single chemical. arsenic is not good for you. It is a known carcinogen, okay? I've done a lot of work in this country as well as elsewhere in the world on arsenic exposure. Arsenic is an interesting chemical, but it's not the only exposure that one can have when one is exposed to arsenic. There's also manganese and other things. So basically an entire gamish, a soup of chemicals that people can be exposed to. So I'm going to divide this into two groups, okay? And these are, the first group basically are those chemicals that have been industrialized chemicals that are essentially legacy chemicals. They've been, this is arsenic, lead, benzene I mentioned, a number of polyaromatic hydrocarbons, et cetera.
Where and how do we most commonly come in contact with them?
Well, for the most part, it's different, okay? If we're looking at it on an individual chemical basis, it's a little bit different. Arsenic is usually found in groundwater. In other words, if you have your own well, it's possible that it's in your water in your well. And if lead can be found in paint, still in houses, in the soil. Interestingly enough, I've been working with a group that's looking at lead in a big way. It's called Pure Earth. It's an organization, it's a foundation based in New York, and they're focusing on lead, and they're finding it's coming from batteries. So people are actually either throwing their batteries out or dismantling the batteries, or interestingly enough, which is kind of scary, and that is that lead is actually used in making spices look more vibrant in their color. Yes, I'm looking.
Is that legal?
Your face, like really? Yeah. So if you mix lead at a certain concentration with your spices, they will become more vibrant and therefore more sellable to other people.
A little scary. I do understand. Any others that are more common that we might come in contact with before we go to the break here shortly?
Well, manganese, mercury. Mercury is a big problem. We as a country should have ratified the Minamata Convention 40 plus years ago, and we didn't. Basically, mercury is found in just about every fish we eat.
I think some of us are walking around with mercury in our mouths and our teeth, right?
Yeah.
And I've seen pictures of some doctors that I know, dentists, and they are wearing get-ups that look like spacesuits as they are taking out mercury filling. So I gather that's dangerous.
That's right. So the second grouping that I mentioned, only because I think it's something we really have to consider it more and more. And these are what's called emerging contaminants, okay? Now, way back when, let's say, lead was an emerging contaminant, but now it's become grandfathered into just about everything we do. But there's PFAS and PFOA, which is what you find when you throw out your pot that has Teflon and it goes into the dump. We never really thought of it as being a problem until fairly recently, and there's a lot of emerging chemicals that are coming out, and frankly, we don't have a clue. Well, I'm exaggerating. We don't have a lot of information on the potential health consequences with regards to a lot of these emerging contaminants.
We talked a lot about PFAS and PFAS last month when we were unpacking plastics pollution. We're going to go to break now, and we have been with Dr. Bill Schultz from the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, and he's coming to us from North Carolina, and we'll be right back with him on the other side of the break. Thank you, Dr. Schultz.
You're welcome.
We want to give a shout-out now to our sponsors. That is Hlth, the world's largest environmental experience, promoting environmental awareness through expo, conferences, film festival, interactive experiences, and now Hlth streaming TV. Our other sponsor is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority, or the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Current issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Whole Foods markets, natural grocers, Central Market, sunflower shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available free for download online at nadallas.com. Check them out. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and much more. Check them out at nhg.com. And our other sponsor is Hlth Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach, and he does not use mercury, looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Hlth is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lhndentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsor. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today. We are back with Dr. William Sook with the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, and we're talking about toxic chemical waste, its effect on environment and health. And Dr. Sook, his special area of expertise is hazardous waste. Now, before the break, though, Bill, you had mentioned that many of the effects are an accumulation of chemicals. I've heard someone else refer to it as a chemical soup or the chemical stew. But you also mentioned something that is very intriguing to me that I want to dig a little deeper into for our listeners, and that is this latency period, which is kind of scary. And that is the point that there is often a while that can be indeterminate between the point of exposure of a toxic chemical and the point when it presents itself as a health, maybe environmental issue as well. And I can remember, and I suspect there are many others, where in our society, we habitually used certain or specific chemicals. And we thought it was okay. We thought it was the greatest thing since apple pie. And then many years later, it was found out how damaging this was. Even cigarettes, they may not be categorized as a chemical. When they first came on board, I don't think anybody had any sense of some of the health effects. Talk to us about this and perhaps give us some examples, if you have some, of these types of things where we at one point thought were good and later turned out to be very hazardous, because I want the listeners to understand that this is something that we potentially live with all the time.
Yeah, okay, let's pick on arsenic because it's easy, okay? Arsenic is not a heavy metal, it's metalloid, which means that it can complex with a bunch of things. I've heard two things about it. Here in the United States, we have fairly high levels of arsenic in rice. And the question becomes, how did it get into rice? Well, it got into rice because, for the most part, because of the rice fields being highly sprayed with pesticides and herbicides that had high arsenic content. And what happens is the arsenic actually stays in the soil and comes up through the root system, so it continually feeds itself, so to speak. It's an interesting process. Interestingly enough, even though there's high levels of herbicides and pesticides that have high arsenic content in other parts of the world, you don't see these same levels in Asia, for example, where they eat a lot of rice. And part of it is because of the practices that they use in cultivating their rice versus the way that we have used in cultivating our rice.
How is it different?
For example, in China, they actually terrace it. And as the water comes down, they actually use a lot of natural water that comes from rain. okay, and it comes down. Most of the rice that we've grown in this country is grown in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama along the shore area, okay? So you don't have the same level of precipitation that washes and cleanses the soil that you do elsewhere in the world, because basically what we did was we took the marshlands and we took out the brackish water, buried it, and put in quote unquote fresh water. But the fresh water is somewhat stagnant. It doesn't flow, okay? So it has to do with the agricultural practices as well.
Are we still finding arsenic in our rice today?
Yes. And interestingly enough, there's an interesting, being in the sciences, there's a lot of diseases that are really interesting, okay? But the point is that there is a disease, it's called CKDU, kidney disease of unknown etiology. It's present in places like Nicaragua and Guatemala, in Sri Lanka, in West Bengal, India, and in Northeast Thailand, okay? It used to be a very rare kidney disease, okay? In this country, we have a great reporting system for different types of kidney diseases and diabetes and what have you. Guess what? In the reporting system in the states of Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, where there's high levels of arsenic and high levels of pesticide use in the growing of rice as well as other crops, we have a high incidence of CKDU in this country. Even though arsenic and pesticides are not emerging chemicals, this is an emerging illness based upon a legacy chemical.
Bill, I want you to talk to us about some of the more common side effects of low-grade hazardous waste exposure.
Again, these are combined exposures. There's two pieces to this. One is when it is delivered. In other words, when the exposure takes place, will set you up for something else, okay? What I mean by that is you have a high level or relatively, even a low level exposure, because it's very variable from person to person. If it happens within the first 5 years of your life, when you're essentially a developing organism, it sets up your various systems to react differently over time. But I would say that one of the biggest problems that I'm aware of, that I see, and has a lot to do with a suppression of immune response. Okay, so you have different chemicals that are not necessarily that do not necessarily attack the immune system per se, but attack different systems, and it is a systems approach to things. So what I mean by that is that all of the systems that are in our body are connected. So if one gets a little bit faulty because of exposure, it's going to set you up for something else. So there's almost a domino effect. But the biggest domino effect has to do with children who have become immunocompromised, or whose responsiveness to an outside force, an outside thing, is compromised because of the chemicals that they've been exposed to.
And we hear a lot today in general for adults as well about autoimmune issues, which are, I'm finding out much of that is undefined, like you're talking about. Really quickly, we only have a couple more minutes to be with you, but I want to talk just a minute about Superfund sites. Okay. And looking at and defining Superfund sites, are these perhaps only older sites that were made when we didn't know better, or what? Because I think many of us don't realize that we may live near or by a Superfund site. I've actually done some real estate consulting on Superfund sites. Define those for us really briefly, and again, are there newer ones coming on board? Because I do realize a lot of them, as you say, were legacy. When we used to use asbestos and things like that we didn't know. I worked many years ago in a city along Lake Michigan that had the largest number of Superfund sites in the world.
Right.
And it was about asbestos and paint, stuff like that.
Right. Well, there's a couple of questions there. And the thing is that, again, the Superfund legislation was designed to answer the concerns of like Love Canal and this place and that sort of thing. And I hate to say this, but I know you're going to find this hard to believe, but Superfund sites are, whether they are cleaned up or not cleaned up, is a political decision and not necessarily a scientific decision. What I mean by that is that in order to be a Superfund site, you have to have certain things involved, okay? Well, there used to be a time when if you had a Superfund site and it was in your representative's district, he or she wanted to get it cleaned up. Now they don't really want to look. They don't really want to see that the site is there because they just don't want to see it. Okay, so but that's a variable response. A lot of people think that Superfund sites also are kind of in the middle of nowhere. Okay, a couple of blocks from the Super Bowl in New Orleans is one of the largest Superfund sites in the country. Okay. And the biggest problem that we're seeing with Superfund sites, per se, right now, is that you have a lot of things going on with climate-related issues, hurricanes, large fires, and this and everything. And I don't remember off the top of my head because it changes almost on a daily basis, but something like I don't know how many millions of people live within 2 miles of a Superfund site.
Indeed, I've heard that. I believe that we have one near here in Texas as well. Thank you so much, Bill. We are going to need to move to the other section of our show, but as always, you always leave us with a lot to think about. We have been with Dr. Bill Sook, again, from the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, coming to us from North Carolina. Thank you so much, and we're going to catch our listeners on the other side as we move into talking more about e-waste or electronic waste. Thank you. Okay. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. Today's show on waste and waste management, toxic chemical waste and e-waste, the environmental and health consequences and opportunities of both of these. The first part of our show, we talked more about toxic chemical waste. Now we want to turn and drill down on e-waste. And the growing volume of electronic waste, including discarded products that most of us use on a daily basis, poses a major threat to the environment and human health. So the United Nations has warned. The world produces as much as 50 million tons of electronic and electrical e-waste a year, weighing more than all of the commercial airliners ever made. And only 20% of this is formally recycled, with 80% of it either ending up in a landfill or being informally recycled. According to a recent report, in addition to health and pollution impacts, improper management of e-waste is resulting in significant loss of scarce and valuable raw materials, and it is estimated that as much as 7% of the world's gold currently be contained in e-waste. And here today to help us unpack some of this are two guests with extensive e-waste knowledge and expertise. Our first guest we're going to talk with on this is Dr. Callie Babbit. And after Dr. Babbit helps us out, we're going to talk with an on-the-ground expert right here from Dallas. Dr. Callie Babbit is Associate Professor in the Golisano Institute of Sustainability at Rochester Institute of Technology, where she conducts research to proactively quantify and minimize environmental impacts of emerging technologies. Dr. Babbit's research group uses methods from circular economy, eco-design, and life cycle assessment to study sustainability challenges and create solutions for consumer electronics, plastics waste, lithium-ion batteries, electric vehicles, nanoparticles, and food waste management. Dr. Babbit is a Fulbright U.S. scholar and a recipient of the National Science Foundation Faculty Early Career Award and the AT&T Technology and Environment Award. Welcome, Callie. We are so glad you could take time to join us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Callie, let's start out by you explaining to our listeners exactly what e-waste is and give us some examples of how listeners come in contact with it every day and how they create e-waste every day?
Well, electronics are undoubtedly a fundamental part of our daily lives, and especially since the pandemic, when all of our social interactions have pretty much gone online. And it turns out that Americans are not that different from everyone else around the world. Mobile phones are one of the most widely owned products. In fact, there's more mobile phones per person around the world than there are toilets. And so these devices that we all have in our pockets, in our homes, are things like laptop computers, smartphones, tablets, TVs, gaming consoles, and now even some emerging things like those wild smart hairbrushes and smart toothbrushes you see on the news. And so all of those products have a lifetime. And once we're done using them as consumers and we discard them, that's when they become electronic waste. Now, the official definition is that electronic waste is anything that we discard that has a cord or a battery. And that, in a lot of countries, includes things like appliances and the electronics that come out of our cars. In the United States, our policies and our solutions really try to focus on those things that are coming out of our household, so those everyday electronics that we all rely on.
In your opinion, what is the environmental impact of our reliance on these electronics, and how do these environmental impacts affect or threaten the environment as well as health?
Well, electronics have what we call a very complex life cycle. So just like an organism, products in our daily lives are born, they're used, and at some point they die and we discard them. And so for electronics, one of the issues is that life cycle happens all around the globe. So first we have to mine a lot of materials that are both scarce and energy intense and expensive to mine. That's things like gold, copper, and even some what we call critical materials like cobalt and lithium. Now, those are mined in some cases in very socially and ecologically vulnerable parts of the world. And so when we dig for those resources, it disrupts the habitat and it causes significant health impacts to the people that live near these mining sites. Then you take all of these raw materials and we have to manufacture them into the components that make the electronics work. It takes an inordinate amount of electricity, water, and fuels to manufacture LCD screens and batteries and the computer chip. Then when we put those into the product, when we start using them as consumers, they take a lot of electricity to power. That electricity in the United States often comes from burning fossil fuels, which contributes to climate change. So all of those resources go into the production and use of electronics before they even become electronic waste. So the first big problem with e-waste is that when we discard a product, we're throwing away all of those resources that went into its production. But then you also have to think about what happens to that product when we're done with it. Consumers typically don't use all the useful life of electronics, and we typically want to go for the next shiniest new model before our old product is really done for. And so when we throw away products that still have life, it means that someone else is not able to use them, or that we're not able to recover all of those valuable materials they contain. Sometimes these products might end up in landfills. They don't have a huge concentration of hazardous materials, but there's some. And if it's put into an unmanaged landfill or disposed of in a part of the world that doesn't have environmental protection, those hazardous materials can go back out into the environment. So the real goal here is to keep these products in productive use as long as possible. And then once we've eked out every bit of use out of them, then to take them to a recycler who can properly recover those materials and put them back into productive use.
Indeed, and we're going to talk to Terry from Dallas later on in the show to tell us about that productive recycling. Now, Callie, I noticed that it looks like in some of your research and the work you do, you create solutions for consumer electronics. What does that involve?
A big part of our research is to really try to understand what consumers are actually buying and how long they're keeping them. So one of the big issues with electronic waste is that a lot of our laws and a lot of our recycling technology is built around products that were manufactured 20, 30 years ago. Take, for example, those big, bulky cathode ray tube televisions that we all used to have. Now, if you think back to the late 2000s, there was a big switch in television broadcasting where they stopped sending out analog TV signals and started sending out digital signals. After that, consumers really stopped buying those bulky tube televisions. We all wanted those light, flat panel TVs and the digital technology that they were able to provide. And so our research looks at things like how do consumer purchasing change over time, like what happens when consumers switch from old to new products. And then we try to use that information to help create data and estimates that can be used by recyclers or by policymakers to get ahead of the curve. So we want to know what kind of products are going to be coming out in the electronic waste stream, not just now, but also 5 or 10 years in the future. We want to get ahead of the issue. Recycling is even more important because they really contain a lot of scarce metals that right now we have to mine all the way around the world. So recycling can actually be a way that the United States could have some domestic mineral security. In other words, we could actually mine a lot of these materials from our products rather than depending on imports from other countries.
But the recycling percentage is so low, according to our statistics. There has to be some more education
There
on that.
really does. And it's not hard for consumers to recycle. You want to find a place that will take back your products. That might be a retailer like Best Buy or Staples. There might be an e-waste recycler near you. You can look at earth911.com to find a place to recycle products. And when you take your product as soon as possible to that recycler, they can repair it, resell it, and put it in the hands of maybe someone who can't afford a new phone and could get a lot of benefit from it. And if it can't be reused, they can put it into these proper environmentally regulated recycling pathways to recover those materials.
I want to close out with you telling us what keeps you up at night about our e-waste.
Well, I think that the thing that excites me about electronics is that they offer us so much benefit. We really want to figure out ways to design products that let us access news and information, that keep us connected socially, that provide us with ways to work remotely and to educate people around the globe. What I think about a lot, though, is what the next big waste problem will be. There's all kinds of crazy new products on the market, from smart watches to smart home devices to smart toothbrushes. We really haven't figured out how to recycle that next generation of electronic waste. And that, I think, is the challenge that we all have to work on together, both research on my end, policy making, education of consumers, and then also developing new recycling technologies.
Indeed. Maybe before they get their licenses or permits or copyrights or what have you, a lot of the new electronics need to have an environmental impact like real estate does. Thank you so much. We've been with Dr. Callie Babbit from the University of Rochester in the research department. Thank you so much, Callie, and we very much look forward to having you back on another show really soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we're going to go to break now, and we want to give a shout out to our sponsors. That is Hlth, the world's largest environmental experience, promoting environmental awareness through expo, conferences, film festival, interactive experiences, and now Hlth streaming TV. For Hlth, Earth Day is every day. Our other sponsor is Natural Awakenings Dallas-Fort Worth Magazine, the green, healthy, and sustainable living authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Current issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Whole Foods markets, natural grocers, Central Market, sunflower shops, and many, many other physical locations, as well as available free for download online at nadallas.com. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more. Check them out at nhg.com. And Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach, and they do not use mercury. Looking at the whole body, specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lynndentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. To today's episode on waste and waste management, toxic chemical waste and e-waste, environmental and health consequences and opportunities. And we are turning to a local North Texas community expert. We are going to be with Terry Schultz from United Electronics Recycling, and she's going to talk with us more, particularly about on-the-ground experience and on-the-ground expertise as it relates to electronic waste. Terry has over 20 years of experience in the environmental industry with 13 plus years in electronic recycling. Before coming to United Electronics Recycling, Terry founded and owned Verde Tech and E-Waste Collections, an electronic recycler and data security company. Over the years, Terry has been heavily involved in multiple environmental organizations, including the Sustainable Dallas Annual Conference, board member for the North Texas Corporate Recycling Association. She is founder and current president of Women in the Environment and the City of Irving Green Advisory Board vice president, as well as the City of Irving's Green Business Council. Terry has extensive knowledge and experience that she's going to share with us today to help us unpack this whole situation more. Welcome, Terry. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Terry, at United Electronics Recycling, you all specialize, again, in the recycling of electronics specifically, which I'm assuming means that's all you do. You don't really recycle any other types of material.
Electronics are the primary commodity, but under that umbrella are appliances. It covers a lot of these small gadgets that you've talked about, from the fancy hairdryer and curling iron to cooking, what have you. But we get a lot of scrap metal. We generate a lot of cardboard. So it's a fairly it's fairly broad umbrella.
I heard someone earlier, it may have been Dr. Zucker, one of our other guests, and they gave what I think is a really good layman's explanation of e-waste or electronic waste, and that it was anything that plugs in or runs on batteries, and that's simple and to the point. Terry, tell us briefly about how you all do this. What is the process? Is there special machinery or something like that? Maybe give us an example of, say, when you get a computer or you get a refrigerator or one of the common pieces of electronics that you do. If you can walk us through that process briefly, then I think people can understand how it's recycled.
Well, keep in mind when we make a pickup or have a community event or people bring it to us, it's a mix of everything. It's a mix of all these kinds of things we've talked about. So it has to get weighed in, it has to be sorted and triaged into the best path. About 20 to 30% can go into resale. The rest is going to get broken down to some kind of commodity stream. We don't use a lot of fancy machinery. A lot of it is hands-on, looking at sorting, breaking down computers into all these different metal components and motherboards, aluminum, copper, wires. Scrap steel is the largest thing we generate from everything we produce. So it comes into us, many different items, and then we have to decide what's the best path for it.
Tell the listeners what you mean when you say different commodity streams.
It might be scrap steel, which is our largest commodity. It's going to be a lot of motherboards where we're generating that gold and copper, a lot of copper wires, different grades of copper, a lot of aluminum. And so we batteries, that get sorted out of different type of batteries. And ultimately, these will go out to metal recyclers that are collecting, again, in even huger volumes for ultimate processing in the manufacturing stream.
So you all are taking that product and then you break it down into the different components, the like components of those products.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And then when you do that and you've broken it down into the scrap metal, the gold or whatever, and you've got these different barrels, then what happens?
When we collect sufficient volume of a particular type of metal or grade of metal, it's going to go out to a metal recycling company. We use several local companies here in North Texas. They, in turn, are collecting in, greater volumes of type, and ultimately it's going to get back into manufacturing streams. But we're the first step. We're the first triage step of getting it into those paths.
Terry, how have you seen the electronics waste stream change over time?
When I first started, it's actually been about 15 years now, there were many of the big CRT tubes and CRT monitors that would come in, and PCs were much larger and heavier than they are today. So today, you might get just as many pieces, but the load might be half the weight that would have been in one time. And so I've definitely seen the size, the weight change through the years. And I think it's true that there are more blending of technologies where things are glued or embedded together, as your previous guest said, and it's maybe getting a little harder to separate things out.
Is there some smart reason why that's happening with many of the things being glued together, or is that just a function of making them smaller?
Design. You know, it's design. They'll try to build these laptops where everything's embedded in the motherboard, and it's a little harder to replace component parts and such. And I suppose in their marketing or manufacturing, they think it's better on that end. But on the downstream reuse side or recycling side, it makes it a little bit harder.
And so how have you seen the actual commodity stream change? Are they making stuff out of different materials?
There's been a big change in plastics. In the early days, we would generate a lot of ABS plastics, and there's very little of that now. If you look at your current laptop or your PC or your favorite phone, you'll notice that it has a lot of different grades of materials. You don't have to be an expert to see that this plastic looks different. It shines different, and so forth. And so there's not as much consistent material in volume to make it worthwhile to recycle some of that. But it's still worth it. You know, we are still able to collect so many valuable resources. We're not going to mine the earth and create more virgin material usage. We're not wasting things by going into landfill. We are recapturing vast volumes of materials, and that's very important to do. Or we are putting it in our resale store, and things have that extended life cycle before it gets to recycling. So it's absolutely worth to recycle.
You told me you're seeing perhaps less use of materials because things are smaller.
Things are smaller, they're lighter weight, they're more all-in-one type things. So that changes maybe how much we can pull or generate of some types of metals. Or when we send it out to specialty processing or smelting, then they're going to have to deal with it downstream, the motherboards that might be more embedded and integrated.
Terry, we just have a minute to go, and I really want to get a really big impact from all of your expertise, and that is, what is perhaps one of the most important things that you have learned and one of the most important leave-behinds for our listener that you can give as a result of your extensive history with the North Texas e-waste industry and the recycling industry in general?
I think find us or find one of my counterparts and get it to us. Let us recycle it. We'll reclaim those materials or see if it has a refurbished life. There are several good companies and good pathways to get this into our hands. Give us the chance to do something with it and make a difference to our community and to our earth and for our children.
Terry, people tend to do things that are easy for them to do. So what is the easiest, the best, i.e. easiest pathway for them to get it to you?
Well, we have a lot of community events. Check and see if we're going to be in your community where you just drive up and unload it or bring it to our facility, or especially commercial accounts, call us and we'll come pick it up, or we'll do that for residential too. I mean, think about it when you buy it and maybe plan a couple of times a year where you're going to try to call through your electronics and get it into somebody's hand. Generally, it's not something you have to dispose of immediately. It's safe and contained in your home, but just get it to us. You know, plan on a couple of times a year, checking your closets and bringing that stuff to us.
How do y'all publicize the community events? Is there a calendar so that as I stack up my box and I have a big box of stuff, I can look somewhere and see, oh, okay, I can take it to that place on that date?
Yes, I mean, we have an event calendar on our website. We post on social media. You can call us. You can email us, talk to us about your needs, and we'll put it together. Otherwise, check your local community and see what's there. Go to your city website. Go to your county website and see what options there are. Besides myself and my counterparts, there are places like Best Buy and some of the nonprofit orgs that will take it in. But get familiar with your community and what access you have.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Terry. You really enlightened us about, again, on-the-ground e-waste, what's happened with it, and given us a real good picture of how our scarce resources are being wasted. But at the same time, it seems to me is that e-waste do stand the opportunity to be more recycled than a lot of other types of waste mainly because of the value of the metal.
I agree.
Thank you for being with us. We've been with Terry Schultz from United Electronics Recycling, certainly very much of an expert in the environmental community in North Texas. Thank you so much, Terry. We appreciate you being with us. And thank you, listeners, for listening in today to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. The conversation starts here, but our goal is for it to continue in your home, in your social circles, your workplaces, at the water cooler, and in the grocery checkout line, so that we can all work together to realize that healthy living is simply not possible without a healthy planet. Our culture is a result of 1 trillion tiny acts taken by billions of people every day, like yourself. Each of those tiny acts can seem insignificant, but all of them add up, one way or the other, to the change that we each live through. This is Bernice Butler. Thank you for joining us, and join us again next week as we talk more about e-waste and waste management. Thank you.